And here we go. Great. Ron Kamen, EarthKind Energy Consulting. Go clean, save green. Thank you, Don Blywaus and Diane for the tagline and the logo. And it's not just go clean and save green, but today I'm going to also say why this is so important. And actually, I'm going to start with why. You guys all remember that from growing up, right? Well, the energy that we're now keeping in the environment because of the carbon that we've put out there, the greenhouse gases, is equal to 500,000 first generation nukes every day, 365 days a year. So that's just to give you a sense of the scale of what we're looking at right now and why this stuff becomes really, really important. What's happening is because of all the greenhouse gases that we're dumping into the environment, basically we're literally changing everything associated with our planet, including the jet streams. And by changing the jet streams and changing the composition of how everything works, we're starting to see longer and more extreme and more frequent extreme weather events such as floods, droughts, heat waves, wildfires, et cetera, et cetera. And when you take a look at what those catastrophes start doing, basically what we're seeing, as everybody knows, or most people know, is an increase dramatic in extreme weather events. This is the national government, federal government, basically just identifying the $1 billion disasters from the numbers. And I know Carlito and others have said, yeah, well, you know, we have much more investments and there's much more property out there. And to an extent that is true, inflation, et cetera. But the reality is that this stuff is going up. We're now seeing a $1 billion disaster more than once a month on the average. Last year, we had almost 2 a month on the average, 22 events in 2020. That was almost $2 trillion at the end of 2020. But, you know, this year we actually had $18 billion weather disasters. So we're now over that $2 trillion worth of cost in terms of the financial impact of these disasters. And the costliest one of this year, the $60 billion event, one of the 5 most costly hurricanes in our history, was Hurricane Ida. So as we take a look, what we're seeing is these 1 in 1,000 year downpour events in the United States. How many since 2010, you might ask? 18. 1 in every 1,000 years, but now we've had 18 in the last 11. All right, it's having an impact on everything. I mean, just to give you some examples, 20 million acres couldn't be planted in 2019, similar numbers and worse in 2020, 2021. So we're having an impact on our food supplies. And then you take a look at things like we've all lived through with Sandy, and what you see is that in 1880, the risk of a Sandy intensity type of event in New York was 1 in every 500 years. By 2017, that risk went up to 1 in 25 years. For the next couple of years, we're looking at that type of event risk 1 in every 5 years. So what does that mean? It means that it's an emergency across the board. It's a medical emergency. The Department of Defense calls it actually the largest threat to national security in the country. And worldwide, when you take a look at the medical impacts, and everybody that knows someone who's got asthma or other respiratory illnesses, this is part of the fallout from all our greenhouse gases and our air pollution. And not only is it an impact on breathing and everything else, but it also has dramatic impact on where people live and the immigrants and people having to move. And the reason why there's going to be about 1 billion climate migrants is because people have nothing to eat and can't live where they were before. And you can take a look around the world and we see this happening again and again and again. So, okay, that's the why. So now let's go to the who. So who am I? I'm Ron Kamen. I've been with EarthKind Energy Consulting. I've been doing clean energy for over 30 years. As the president of the Solar Industries Association, I've done campaigns and programs with all different kinds of customers, helped get some national awards from the EPA and others, part of a whole host of organizations. They did a thing for the Business Council of Westchester last year, the Clean Energy Series. And I'm also associated with various different business groups, including E2, the Environmental Entrepreneurs, which is 10,000 business leaders across the country who are working to understand and promote that it's not business or the economy, the environment or the economy. They actually go hand in hand. What's good for the environment is actually good for the economy. We could talk about that more. Some of the things I've done in the past with some of my clients, saved a lot of money, a lot of reduction in CO2, got a lot of incentives. I work again with all different sectors, from government through nonprofits and for-profits companies. You may recognize some of the government entities in this kind of list, and there's a whole bunch more, plus nonprofits, schools, private schools, nonprofits, colleges, universities, et cetera, and then a whole host of for-profit companies, big, small, in the middle, all different sizes. All right, so a few different testimonials. Business Council of Westchester, Marsha had something nice to say about me, which is really great. This was one of my favorite customers, the Oakwood Friends School, who thought I was crazy when I said that they could go solar with for 100% of their electricity usage and with no money down. And then a few years later, they actually wound up doing it, and we got it done, and they're now one of my longer term contracts, and we're working on all sorts of things with electric vehicles and all with them. Similar with the New York State Bridge Authority, which does the 5 bridges in the Hudson Valley, everything north of the Tappan Zee up through Hudson and that sort of area, the Rip Van Winkle Bridge. So all those 5 bridges. And yep, anyway, lots of good references from various different folks. So when you think about greenhouse gases, folks really don't have a sense of what it is, but really it's all the energy we're using for electricity, for heating, and for transportation. And when you take a look and compare that, what you really should recognize is that that directly translates into dollars that we're spending on energy for our electricity, 22 billion in New York, heating and cooling, 14 billion, transportation, $25 billion. So when you take a look at your energy bills, realize that every dollar has a direct correlation to greenhouse gases and our impact on the environment. So in New York State in 2019, we passed something called the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or the CLCPA. And what this is doing is across the board, reducing the amount of greenhouse gases. 40% is the goal by 2030, 85% by 2050. And there's several ways we're going to be doing that. We'll talk about that in a minute, but the primary thing is to generate all the electricity, which will then power not just our electric system, but also our heating, cooling, and our transportation systems. We're currently at 25% of our electricity system is renewable today. The goal is 70% by 2030. So a massive amount of solar and wind, both on and offshore. And then we'll be going up to 100% by 2040. So the solar that you're starting to see everywhere is going to become very widespread very quickly. And we'll talk about how that's going to happen in just a moment. The way that CLCPA is coming into place is from incentives today. So when we take a look, there's cash grants to the tunes of about $5 billion coming out of New York State, $1.5 billion for clean electricity, heating and cooling, $680 million, clean transportation with electric vehicles and charging stations, another $650 million. And then you combine that with tax credits, with low interest financing, and with the ability to do energy as a service, no cash out, just pay for the energy at a reduced cost for either electricity, heating, cooling, or transportation. And with no cash out, you start saving money from day one. And if you don't want to do it today, that's okay. But in 2024 in New York City, and not too long after around the state, there will be penalties for not meeting carbon reduction goals. In New York City, it's the New York Local Law 97, which puts a certain amount of greenhouse gases per square foot. New York State right now is meeting and having discussions about how are we going to hit these goals. One of the things that's going to change are codes. So very shortly, codes will not allow fossil fuels. That's going to be happening some point within the next 5 to 10 years. And there will be penalties if you don't start hitting these goals. The carbon emission limits in New York City, starting in 2024, about 50 cents a square foot per year. So total up your square footage, total up your client's square footage, take a look at what they're doing with fossil fuels, how efficient they are or not, whether they have renewable sources of electricity powering up their electricity system, look at their fossil fuel heating systems, and look at also transportation and realize that these costs will be going up, and you can either take advantage of the incentives today, start saving money, or else start paying penalties tomorrow. And to give you a sense of the incentives and where they were, this was the beginning of last year when incentives for solar were 60 cents a watt. And a lot of people in Westchester got into this at that point in time or soon after, which is why you're seeing all the construction now happening once they applied to the program and locked in the incentives. That incentive then went down in May by 10 cents, went down in November down to 40 cents, went down in August again to 30 cents. We're now down to 20 cents, so a 2/3 reduction in the incentives, which adds up very quickly on larger projects. And as you see, we're in the second to last block. Next year, within this next year, we'll be going into the final block. And on Long Island, there are no more incentives for solar. And that's going to be the same thing that happens around the state. So if you're thinking at all about solar, get with the program now, because very soon these incentives will be gone. Who's gone solar? Everyone from apartments through temples and churches, other types of religious institutions, medical offices, country clubs, apartments, condos, co-ops, parking lots, putting solar over their parking lots. Great use of space and getting energy as well as potentially cash income out of unused space on your roof or unused space in your parking lots. And with solar, just to give you some sense, there's the ability, as most people think about, of building, owning, and operating. That gives you a good return on investment. If you have capital or access to capital, gives you a great return, especially if you can take advantage of the tax credits. But if you can't, you can do stuff without laying out your own capital and without taking advantage yourself of the tax credits by doing something like called a power purchase agreement or an operating lease, where someone else owns a system, puts it in, they pay out all the capital, but then you pay for the energy over time or pay a monthly lease to get that benefit from your solar system. And then the other option is if you have about 20,000 square feet or more of roof space or 100 parking spots or more, you can do a lease your roof or lease your parking lots or lease your grounds, where third parties will put in all the solar and actually pay you a lease just to have that space producing energy and selling that into the grid. And we can talk about that later. This is one of my former clients, Macy's, which did in Staten Island. I know a lot of you don't like to go to Staten Island, but hey, you know, down in Staten Island, Macy's has a distribution center. And one of the things that Macy's does is all across the country, anytime they're going to do a new roof, they always use solar with the roof, because what they found is either with third-party financing or by taking the tax credits and the accelerated depreciation benefits, they can have an outstanding return on their investment, get the new roof, have the asset that now gets paid for by the solar system with their new roof. And it's worth thinking about and looking at, and including a roof. If you're doing a new roof, looking at solar as an option and talking about how to structure the deal that way, or including a roof replacement potentially into your solar project over time. You can usually build in one replacement of your roof as part of the deal if you have a big enough deal and a strong enough solar asset. Okay, heat pumps. So a third of the climate issue is electricity. Another third is heating and cooling, all the thermal energy that we're burning for our heating and cooling of our buildings. And we all have heat pumps. Refrigerators are a heat pump. Air conditioners are a heat pump. Central air conditioners, whether it's whatever type of air conditioner you have. So an air source heat pump is basically an air conditioner that not only cools your space, but then reverses that same process so that during the cooler seasons, you're taking the heat out of the air. And even down to -15, there's heat in the air that we can grab cost effectively and then bring into our buildings. So during the summer, dumps heat out of the buildings and cools our space. During the winters, it reverses that same process, compression and expansion, but then brings that heat into our buildings. So some examples of air source heat pumps: Murphy Brothers, one of my clients, and a great partner, did it at the Mamaroneck self-storage building. St. Bartholomew's, and Kathy in Atlantic Westchester knows about all the heat pumps around the county, because there's a lot of them, and many more people moving to this great source of efficient heating and cooling, twice as efficient as fossil fuels. Any fossil fuels less than 100%. Air source heat pumps are 200 to 300% efficient. But the most efficient form of heating and cooling is using the heat beneath our feet in the ground source heat pumps, or geothermal. Half the energy coming from the sun gets put into the earth. That's why if you go down 4 or 5 feet, no matter where you are, there's a constant temperature in this part of the world of about 50 or 55 degrees. So what happens with a ground source heat pump is, whether you got a field or a parking lot or a driveway, you could put these pipes under, or if you could just drill straight down, what happens is that there's a tube that goes down. It's now a closed loop, so it just sends a fluid, a water, maybe water with glycol, down and around, and just brings that energy back up. Whether you're cooling with it or heating with it, it brings that 50, 55 degrees temperature up into your space and building, and now you have efficiencies of 400 to 500% compared to any other source of heating and cooling. It's the most efficient form. It's being done whether you have a large house, a small house, any size property. Basically, you can drill down even on small plots now and make this technology happen. And the best example that some folks know about and that I love to share is this one here in New York City, which is St. Patrick's Cathedral. At St. Patrick's Cathedral, they drilled 2,000 feet into the Manhattan bedrock under St. Patrick's Cathedral, and that heating and cooling system was 40%, used 40% less space than traditional HVAC. It was the least capital cost option for them compared to anything else that they were looking at, and they're saving 30% a year on energy. In St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan, it's an incredible project and one to think about. But that's not the only one. It's fascinating that here, the first time I saw these types of structures, this is a multifamily building in Canada, and these guys drill right under the footprint of the building when these new buildings were going up. And that footprint under any building now in this part of the world, you go down in New York State 500 feet with holes under the footprint of any building, and that geothermal heating and cooling can carry the heat, hot water, and cooling up to 30 stories. These were the first buildings that I saw that were doing that, but then I came across in New Paltz, Cyril Place, which did a similar thing, and now all the tenants in this building have no cost for electricity, no cost for heating, no cost for hot water, because they combined it with solar on the roof, and now with solar and geothermal, basically they wiped out their electricity and their heating and cooling and hot water costs. Similarly, this building in the Rockaways did a similar thing. All the geothermal, again, under the footprint of this building with solar on the roof. The heating and cooling is less than natural gas for all the tenants. And the AC, the air conditioning, is $10 a month compared to everybody else in the area having bills of $100 a month or more for their air conditioning during the summer. Okay, third area. So a third of the carbon is electricity, a third of the carbon is heating and cooling, a third of the carbon and greenhouse gases is from transportation. And so electric vehicles, it took the world over 20 years to reach 1 million electric vehicles in 2016. Since that, what we've seen is an exponential increase. It's been dramatic, where the prices keep coming down, the efficiencies go up, and it's not just Tesla anymore. There are now 40 different vehicles that are incentivized by New York State. No matter what your brand is that you enjoy, you can now have an electric vehicle in that brand that will take you wherever you want to go. And just to give you a sense, GM, Ford, all these different places. Massachusetts now is not going to allow any new cars that aren't electric by 2035. Volvo is doing it across the world by 2030. IKEA, every manufacturer, every supplier is starting to move in this direction for a lot of reasons. We're seeing cars like the Ford Mustang E, the GM Hummer electric vehicle. We're also seeing the Ford F-150 truck, if you've seen that. Ford also has an E-Transit electric commercial van that's coming out. And Amazon ordered 100,000 electric delivery vehicles. So as you're getting your Amazon deliveries, you're going to see more and more electric vans delivering your packages and goods and food. And the interesting things with all these electric vehicle technologies, they're now cheaper to buy because of the tax credits, New York State utility incentives, and other discounts. They're cheaper to drive. Instead of $3 a gallon of gas, you're looking at the equivalent of $1 to $2 per gallon. So you look at the cost per mile, and you're saving money per mile on fuel. And then third is they're cheaper to maintain. Instead of having to change your oil and transmission fluids, there's no oil, no transmission fluids, 20 moving parts instead of 2,000. So in terms of looking at fleets, New York City has over 2,000 electric vehicles. They found it was the cheapest cost of all the options. Their total cost of ownership was dramatically less. And the same thing Consumer Reports found is true for owners. Instead of having a coupon for your maintenance, for your oil and repair costs, it comes standard with any electric vehicle because you have so much less maintenance. And to give you a sense, okay, so where do I charge? What do I do? 98% of our trips are less than 50 miles, which means that you could take a regular electric vehicle, plug it into a regular wall socket in your garage or wherever you have a wall socket, charge it overnight, and you have enough capacity to go and do 98% of your trips. You still have to think about it if you're going distance, but in that case, you could rent a car or you could do a couple other things we could talk about later. There'll be more and more charging stations that are coming out. And just to give you a sense, by 2035, New York State just passed a law, no more gas vehicles going to be sold in New York State in 2035 either. Financial savings, so you can do this stuff with capital and tax credits and get a 10 to 30% return on your investment. Do that all the time with lots of different kinds of for-profit customers, or for nonprofit customers, governments, or other folks who don't have access to capital or can't take the tax credits, no cash down, at least 10% a year savings. Three-step process that we go through. We analyze your existing energy situation, we strategize with you about what the right solutions are, the technologies, the different approaches, et cetera. And then we energize and we turn everything on. And there's a whole process that we go through with the analyze, with the strategize, with the energizing, where we look at all the different options, financing, et cetera, and then make it happen for you so that you get capital and energy savings and carbon reductions with minimal pain and maximum gains. Good customers for us, new construction and renovation. Again, pretty much anybody that's doing massive renovation or doing new construction, commercial or residential. Anyone with high energy costs and aging systems, especially on the heating and cooling systems, but electricity as well. And then folks with fleets that look to make this transition. And as part of the national, international effort, there are now going to be standards applied to supply chain. So if you have a larger supplier, you're going to find that many of them want you to have greenhouse gas goals because you're in their greenhouse gas inventory. All right, and then how fast do we need to change? So looking at what we currently have out there in terms of commitments, we're looking at a 5 degrees rise Fahrenheit, which is going to dramatically change the shape of everything on the planet and really have the potential to bring down civilization as we know it. To get to even the 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit that we're currently getting close to, that's a 50% reduction by 2030, which is pretty dramatic and where we absolutely need to be if we're going to keep going as usual. So the question is, how fast can we change? And I really always like to end with this slide, which is that in 1900, all horse and buggies, one car, right where you can see it. How long did it take until we had all cars and one horse and buggy? 13 years. It's about the amount of time we have to make the change. I'm Ron Kamen, EarthKind Energy Consulting. Go clean, save green. Happy to answer questions, and thanks a lot, guys.
That was fabulous.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna leave this open to questions. It's a little after 9:30 right now. Not enough time for individual breakout rooms. So if anyone has things they want to talk to him about, go ahead.
Yeah, Ron, the geothermal for existing homes, is that something that can be done, or
It's definitely technologically feasible. The question becomes, is it a worthwhile, cost-effective option?
Right.
And if you have oil or propane, almost definitely, yes, you want to put it out to bid, get a few different providers, and make sure you're getting a quality installation. But yeah, basically, no matter what size plot, you can now drill down, right? So by drilling down, you can basically do it on any size plot and be able to get that geothermal heating and cooling. The question becomes, what's the retrofit and the interface with your existing heating system? If you already have forced hot air, that's a good step in the right direction because you already have the vents to be able to move air around. If you have central air, you're probably in a good place as well because, again, you have the vents. If you don't have the vents, then you're going to have to pay extra to get that heating and cooling into the rooms, and that becomes a little more costly and tricky. But the incentives now, Con Ed just doubled the incentive for geothermal heating and cooling. So if you're in Con Ed territory, excellent time. There's a 26% federal tax credit that you also could take advantage of. That helps reduce the cost by another 26%. So between Con Ed stuff and the federal tax credit, some state things that come in, you're in a really good place for geothermal, especially in Con Ed territory, but pretty much anywhere that you have oil or propane as your heating source.
Not natural gas. Tell them about the lead I gave you and what happened at that house.
Oh, yes, go ahead, Kathy. Why don't you share, please?
Okay, so I have a friend who has a mega mansion, huge. I don't even know how many square feet it is. They have like 20 dishwashers just, in their house. It's a residential place. They have a ballroom. Okay. So I knew he had to do something with his aging HVAC system. He went to Higher Atlantic Westchester. We don't do residential, unfortunately, because it would have been a great job. So I introduced him to Ron, and Ron went over there and he took it from there, and they are almost completed with a brand new geothermal system in their main house, their carriage house, their pull out. So Ron, you could tell them about it. It's been unbelievable.
Yeah.
Kathy,
So
Kathy,
one of the
should
things,
have classified that as a hotel.
yeah, I know they should.
Bigger than a hotel.
Yeah, the one thing that folks should be aware of is energy prices are going to start going through the ceiling for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is the supply impact. But then all these storms are knocking out, right, our whole supply chain of oil and natural gas and everything else. And Texas in particular just keeps getting slammed month after month, year after year. So, which is where a lot of our oil and natural gas goes through. So anyway, prices are going up. The great thing about geothermal and solar is that once you put it in, you've got basically a pretty fixed price energy source. Even without the solar, if you just have geothermal, compared to volatile electric and gas and other costs, what you're seeing is a relatively stable cost of electricity. It goes up, but it never goes up as much as oil and gas fluctuates. And in terms of your question, gas is a little bit tough because gas has still been relatively cheap, but it's going to be the point where gas too becomes a cost-effective alternative to do geothermal because of the fact that gas costs are going to go up and the state's going to start banning gas and putting taxes onto gas. So it's going to become more and more cost effective as we go along, and it deals with volatility in the energy markets. And if you have solar supplying it, now you're cash free. So that return on investment becomes good, even for natural gas, but it's always great for oil and propane. Someone else had a question?
Yeah, Ron. So on electric vehicles, the knock has always been the ability to charge. I go to work and there's no place to charge, and my commute is 71 miles each way or 76 miles each way. I know you can go about 200 miles on a charge, but 300 miles on a charge. But it becomes a matter of efficiency. What are they looking at doing by 2035 to make that 1,500 miles or?
Yeah. So Great question. Thank you, Steve. So, so first, even for you right now, if you had like my little Nissan Leaf, right? I could do 225 miles. So I plug it in at night. I do my round trip 200 miles and I'm good, right? If you do need to stop, there are more and more charging stations out there. The New York State and the Power Authority have a whole host of fast DC fast chargers that are going up on all the main thoroughfares. And pretty much if you look on a map now, you almost always are within a short distance of a high-speed DC fast charger, which basically gives you 80% of your charge in 20 minutes or so. So you go in, you have a cup of coffee, use the restroom, come back, and you're good to go almost anywhere. Tesla has their own charging system, as folks know. So Tesla has their own supercharger network across the country. And if you have a Tesla, you're in a good place. And Tesla has led the way, and they're great in a lot of ways. But most people don't want Teslas for one reason or another. And there are a host of options that are out there. And again, if you have the ability to charge at home, you're most likely good for 98% of your trips. But there are more and more charging stations. So part of that massive investment that New York State is making is in charging stations. They had great incentives that just filled up, unfortunately, for commercial properties and multifamily properties, where they were pretty much paying almost the whole ride to be able to get charging stations in multifamily buildings and in commercial establishments. There's still some opportunity there. It's just not quite as good as it was. And that's the way it's going to keep being, I think, is that the incentives are going to keep going down and we're going to have to move in this direction. So, but in terms of your question, the technology keeps advancing. So it used to be that 50 kW or 50,000 watts was kind of a fast charger. Now 100, 125 kW is moving ahead. And so vehicles are charging faster and more intensely. The next wave is 350 kW, 7 times faster than the last generation. There's only a few vehicles right now that can take it that fast. They take that charge that fast, but they're coming out more and more. Every manufacturer is moving in this direction. So we're headed in the right direction. It's just a race.
How much does it cost to charge at one of these stations when you pull up for 20 minutes?
You know, so it's cheaper than gas. It's about half the price of gas usually. So if you were looking to do it versus gasoline and you looked at your cost per mile, but you know, for instance, I was traveling around Westchester and trying to get home one day, and I had to pull into a charging station near a supermarket, which I did, and in 20 minutes it cost me $10. And that was it.
Kat. It's a little under $10 for a full charge.
Yep.
John has a question.
Yep. Great. Go ahead.
So that's $10 at home. If you do it at home, let's say 110 AC all night long, how does it affect your electric bill for the month? Let's say. I mean, just a rough idea.
Relatively minimal. I mean, depending upon how much you drive, you know, you can do the calculation. But if you figure it out, it's usually, let's say, 3 miles per kilowatt hour. So take your mileage, right, and then figure out your cost of electricity. Kind of territory, your cost of electricity is about 25 cents a kilowatt hour. So in that case, you would get, for 25 cents, you'd get 3 miles. So for every buck, you'd get 12 miles, and then you could just take it from there and compare it to whatever you're paying for gas now. So, okay. So relatively minimal, but you know, it depends on how many kilowatt hours and how many miles you drive. So.
Unmute yourself, John.
John.
I have a question about the solar energy and properties that are not capable of installing solar. Like some years ago, we had someone else in the group that was selling solar energy and came to my particular condo and said, it's not suitable because the roof line is irregular. So what do you do in a situation like that?
Great question. So it used to be you had to have the solar where your utility bill was, where your meter was, right? And then the next phase from that is that you could put the solar wherever you have a property, that you can then have the solar stream that energy to your property. And it's really an accounting thing more than it is a physical thing. But you could put it, for instance, in a parking lot, right? So put it over your parking lot. If you've got parking there, that's one way to do it. The next phase and the opportunity is something called community solar. And what you're seeing is a lot of developments around Westchester now are doing community solar projects. And on large roof structures, on large parking lots, they're putting solar and they're making that solar available to individuals and to establishments that want to have solar but can't put it on their buildings. So you can get the financial and the environmental benefits of solar, but not have it on your properties. So there are some options that are available to people, either from remote net metering or from community solar, to be able to get solar and have those benefits, even if you can't host it on your property. Thanks, great question.
Hey, Ron,
Ron?
question for you on the geothermal.
Yes, sir.
It's two-pronged. How far below finished grade do you need to go if you're going under the structure? And what effects do encountering groundwater have on the geothermal system?
Great questions. Thanks so much. So in New York State, you can go down 500 feet without getting additional permits. There's a process with the Department of Environmental Conservation because they term it mining. If you go down 500 feet, more than 500 feet, in which case then you have to deal with additional permits. That's in the process of being looked at. Hopefully that will be changed, but right now you can go down 500 feet without additional permits. That's usually a kind of good piece, because then with that 500 feet, you can carry the heating, cooling, and hot water load for most structures, definitely all multifamily, and depending upon the energy intensity of other buildings, up to 25 or 30 stories. So 500 feet is that limit. Water is actually a good thing. It's a closed loop, so you're not dealing with interaction with the aquifer so much. The only challenge is making sure that you can drill the well and that the grouting and such you're using is not going to interfere with the aquifer. But water generally is actually a better mechanism for thermal transmission. So having water down there is not a bad thing. The best to drill in, though, is actually bedrock, because even though you would think bedrock is hard to drill in, it winds up being a stable source as opposed to sand, which keeps filling in the holes. It's a stable source and it's a good conductor. But bedrock with water is actually the best because you get that thermal transmission. So great questions. Thank you, Carlito.
Ron, from a non-consumer point of view, tell us who we can introduce you to. In other words, in terms of a corporation, or is a municipality advantageous to you? If you can give us a
warning, Ron. I'm just a heads up. We're all going all the way to the end. You have the floor.
Oh, so sorry. Thank you very much.
Good.
I appreciate the opportunity. So for me, I have municipal clients such as the Village of Pelham. I've done a whole host of work with a bunch of various different municipalities. So that's always a good potential opportunity if that municipality has goals and they want to hit those goals. Anybody doing new construction, any commercial property doing new construction, the best time to bring me in is when they're starting to plan. Because one example, I had a multifamily housing developer in Westchester who had done all the right things. They were building a green building. They were getting certain certifications, but they missed $250,000 of incentives that they didn't realize that they had to file with the utility and make happen. I was able to get them about half of that back after the fact, but if I would have gotten in the beginning, actually they would have gotten the $250,000 and they could have qualified potentially for $1 million worth of incentives. So they missed the boat by just a couple of technology changes and not realizing that there were all these incentives out there. So anybody doing new construction, it's a great opportunity for them to look at these technologies, both solar, geothermal, and also the electric vehicle charging stations. Municipalities are good, nonprofits are good. Anybody with a building, basically, anybody that's doing new construction or major renovation, it's a great potential client for me. Thanks,
Only
Diane.
work in New York. Do you only work
What's
with
that?
New York client?
Hey,
Do you only
Ron.
work with New York clients? Or do you go into
No. Actually, I got actually a new residential project down in Key West, Florida, of all places, and I'm helping them figure out how to do the solar and the clean heating and cooling technologies and the electric vehicle stuff down in Florida. So I'll go anywhere. I'll do anything with the right client anywhere. That's new construction, and that's definitely the best when I can do new
Hey,
construction.
Ron, don't these geothermal, don't they have heat pumps and that kind of stuff that requires electricity? So if the electricity gets knocked out, it's going to get knocked out too.
Right. So really good point, Steve. Thank you very much. Yep, absolutely. These are electric technologies. That's what makes them very efficient, and that's what makes them clean. The challenge then becomes, okay, well, where is that electricity coming from? And what happens if the electricity grid goes down? Which is why the best is to have on-site solar with some battery storage built in. So that way you have resiliency that's built into it. And that's one of the other avenues that we look at, is how resilient do you want your property to be? How often does the grid go down? Will it go down? Are you expecting it to go down? And all I can say is the grid's going to keep going down more and more often as we get these extreme weather events. Had some clients in Westchester, Mamaroneck, and elsewhere that had 6 feet of water, right, where all the cars were on the water, 300 cars wiped out, basements wiped out, utility rooms wiped out. So looking at that resiliency piece with the flooding that's going to come and the extreme weather events is really important by building in solar with battery storage and then electric infrastructure. If you can disaggregate from the grid when the grid goes down, that's your best resiliency option, and it's also going to provide you decent returns.